Truck driver saves disoriented elderly woman on the highway. What she told him changed his life. Walter Thompson adjusted the rearview mirror of his truck as the first rays of sunlight touched the asphalt of Interstate 70. 23. Years on the road had hardened his heart as much as his calloused hands, and loneliness had been his only constant companion since he left his family in Denver. That's when he spotted a frail figure by the roadside. An elderly woman with silver hair and a floral dress waved desperately, clutching a worn canvas bag. Walter almost didn't stop. Rule number 1 of the trucker's code: never pick up strangers. But something in the woman's gaze made him hit the brakes. "Could you help me?" the woman asked in a trembling voice as Walter rolled down the window. "I'm lost, son." Walter hesitated, his fingers drumming on the steering wheel. He had a delivery to make in Chicago in less than 12 hours. "Are you alone out here?" he asked, scanning the deserted road around them. They were at least 20 miles from the nearest town. "Completely alone," she replied, clutching the bag to her chest. "But I need to get to Fort Collins urgently. It's a matter of life." Walter let out a deep sigh. "Get in. I can drop you at the next truck stop or town, that's it." The gratitude in the woman's eyes was so intense, it made Walter uncomfortable. He got out to help her into the cab, noticing how her hands shook. As she settled into the passenger seat, the scent of lavender filled the space, replacing the usual smell of strong coffee and cigarettes. "My name is Dorothy Williams," she introduced herself as Walter pulled back onto the road. "God bless you for stopping, son." "Walter," he replied curtly, not offering his last name. "What were you doing alone on the highway? Don't you have family?" Dorothy gazed out the window as the Colorado countryside rushed by. "I do. But sometimes people lose each other, don't they?" Something in the way she said it made Walter grip the wheel tighter. He hated philosophical talk. He hated talking, period. "Fort Collins isn't on my route," he warned. "I can drop you in Boulder. You can catch a bus from there." Dorothy turned to him with a serene smile that didn't match the situation. "You're headed to Chicago, aren't you? Delivering a load of auto parts to the factory on Lincoln." Walter slammed the brakes, tires screeching on the asphalt. A car behind them honked furiously before speeding past. "How do you know that?" he asked, his body tense. Dorothy kept smiling, unshaken. "Your name is Walter Thompson Miller, born October 12, 1972 in Aurora. You left your wife Laura and your son Tyler 15 years ago. You've been driving trucks since you were 20 and drink your coffee black, no sugar." Walter's face went pale. His hand instinctively moved to the door, as if ready to jump from the moving vehicle. "Who are you?" he whispered, his throat dry. "Someone who knows your story, Walter, and who knows you've been lost far longer than I have." Silence hung between them. Walter seriously considered leaving her right there, but something stopped. Him, a mix of fear and curiosity he hadn't felt since childhood. "You have every right to leave me here," Dorothy continued as if reading his thoughts. "But if you do, you'll never know why your son is in Fort Collins." Walter's world seemed to freeze. "My son, what?" "Tyler is at Memorial General Hospital. He's been there for 2 months. Time is running out, Walter, and you're his only hope." Walter swallowed hard, his heart hammering against his ribs. 15 years. 15 years without seeing his son since the day he left to buy cigarettes, and never came back. The guilt he had tried to drown in the asphalt of the highways, and the lonely nights in truck cabins now came flooding back. "You're lying," he said, but his voice betrayed doubt. "You have a scar on the back of your head," Dorothy replied, calmly. "From when you fell out of a guava tree at 9 years old. Your father took you to the hospital on the back of his bicycle." Walter instinctively touched the nape of his neck, where the small crescent-shaped scar remained hidden beneath, the graying hair at his temples. "House is some, I don't have all the answers, Walter, but I can take you to your son if you let me." The trucker took a deep breath, gazing at the horizon where the sun had now fully risen. The cargo, the deadline, the job, everything suddenly seemed less important than the mention of that name he avoided even thinking about. "Why should I believe you?" Dorothy opened her purse and pulled out a photograph. It was Tyler, but now a grown man, no longer the 10-year-old boy he had left behind. The young man lay in a hospital bed, pale but with a forced smile on his face. "Because everyone deserves a second chance, Walter. Even you." Something inside the trucker's chest seemed to break. With trembling hands, he started the engine again and made a U-turn on the highway. "If you're lying," he began but didn't finish. "I would never lie about this," Dorothy replied, carefully putting the photo away. "Now we have a long journey ahead, and an even longer story to share." As the truck picked up speed in the opposite direction, Walter couldn't imagine that this seemingly disoriented elderly woman not only knew his past, but also held the keys to his future. The Colorado sun shone brightly as they passed the sign, marking the border with Chicago. Walter drove in silence, absorbing the information Dorothy had given him piece by piece during the first hours of the trip. Tyler, his son, now 25, was hospitalized with a severe kidney condition. He needed a transplant and time was running out. How Dorothy knew all this, or how she had found Walter, remained a mystery. "You haven't asked about his mother," Dorothy observed, breaking the silence. Walter tightened his grip on the steering wheel. "Laura, did she move on?" "Yes. She remarried when Tyler was 14, a good man, a math teacher. He was a good stepfather." Relief and jealousy tangled in Walter's chest. Relief that Laura hadn't been alone, jealousy that another man had raised his son. "But did she—" Walter hesitated. "Did she tell him about me?" Dorothy looked out the window, where fields of sugarcane rushed past. "Yes. She never hid who his father was, never spoke ill of you to Tyler." Walter felt a lump in his throat. "So he knows I was the one who chose to leave, that I abandoned him?" "He knows. But there are things you don't, Walter." Walter's phone rang, interrupting the conversation. It was Frank, his boss. With a sigh, he answered on speaker. "Where are you, Walter? The tracker shows you're going the wrong way. The delivery is today." "I have a personal issue. Frank, an emergency." "Emergency?" The voice on the other end sounded skeptical. "The only emergency you have is delivering that load by 6. 15 years working for me, and you've never pulled this before." Walter glanced at Dorothy, who watched the exchange with a calm expression. "It's my son, Frank. He's in the hospital." Silence on the other end. "Son? What son?" "You never mentioned having a son." The tone was distrustful. "Because I left him 15 years ago," Walter replied, feeling the weight of those words. "And now he's dying." More silence, then a heavy sigh. "You have until tomorrow, Walter. Not a minute more or you're fired. And you owe me a better explanation when you get back." The call ended. Walter wiped the sweat from his brow, noticing his hands were shaking. "You didn't have to risk your job," said Dorothy. "Yes, I did," he replied, staring at the road. How did you know where to find me?" Dorothy smiled mysteriously. "I've been looking for you for a long time, Walter, longer than you can imagine. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now, back to the story." They stopped at a gas station to refuel and grab something to eat. As Walter filled the tank, he watched Dorothy through the convenience store window. The elderly woman moved slowly between the shelves, examining products with curiosity. There was something odd about her movements, as if she were relearning how to navigate the world. At the register, the cashier gave Walter a suspicious look when he paid for the gas and snacks for both of them. "Your mother?" the young man asked, nodding toward Dorothy. "No," Walter answered curtly, taking his change. Back at the table where Dorothy waited, Walter placed a sandwich and coffee in front of her. "Thank you," she said, holding the cup with both hands as if seeking warmth. "You still haven't told me how you found me or how you know so much about me," Walter pressed, biting into his own sandwich. Dorothy took a sip of coffee before answering. "I met your son at the hospital. We shared the same floor." She paused, her eyes distant. "I spent a lot of time there, Walter, enough to learn people's stories." "Are you sick too?" he asked, noticing for the first time the deep shadows under her eyes and the pallor of her face. "I was. Now I'm just..." tying up loose ends. A chill ran down Walter's spine. What kind of loose ends? The kind we should all settle before it's too late. Dorothy stared at him intently. Your son never stopped looking for you, you know, even when everyone told him it was pointless. Walter lowered his eyes to his coffee. Why? Why would he look for me after what I did? People have their reasons, Walter. We don't always understand love. Dorothy pulled a folded envelope from her bag. He asked me to give you this if I ever found you. Walter looked at the envelope as if it were a bomb about to explode. His name was handwritten on the front in script he didn't recognize. Read it when you're ready, Dorothy said, rising with difficulty. I'll go to the bathroom in the meantime. Alone at the table, Walter turned the envelope over in his fingers several times before finally gathering the courage to open it. Inside was a handwritten letter and a photograph. A boy of about 3 smiling, sitting on the lap of a younger man Walter barely recognized as himself. The letter began, Dad, if you're reading this, it means Mrs. Dorothy succeeded where I failed for 10 years finding you. I don't know if you'll want to see me after all this time, but there's something I need to tell you in person before it's too late. This isn't about forgiveness or resentment. That time has passed. I have a kidney condition inherited from your family. The doctors say I need a transplant and time is running out. I'm not asking for your kidney, that would be too much to ask after so long. I just want to meet the man who gave me life, since mine may be coming to an end. If you want to see me, I'll be at Memorial General Hospital in Fort Collins. Your son, Tyler. Walter didn't realize he was crying until a tear fell onto the paper. The message was direct, free of accusations or melodrama, which somehow made it even more painful. He wrote that 3 weeks ago, Dorothy said, having returned unnoticed. How is he now? Walter asked, carefully tucking the letter back into the envelope. Getting worse, Dorothy answered simply. We need to keep moving. Back on the road, the sky began to darken. Walter drove with his mind miles away, reliving moments he had tried to bury. The first time he held Tyler in his arms, his son's first steps, the sleepless nights when he had a fever. Why did I leave? He murmured, more to himself than to Dorothy. Only you can answer that, Walter. He shook his head. I was a coward. Laura and I were always fighting. Money was never enough. The boy deserved better. And you thought disappearing was better? Dorothy's direct question hit him like a punch. At the time, I thought so. I thought they'd be better off without me. He laughed bitterly. And maybe they were. Then why are you going back now? Walter stayed silent for a long moment. Because he's sick. And because this might be my only chance to do something right in my life. Dorothy smiled, the first genuine smile since they'd met. Then maybe you're not as much of a coward as you think. As the night deepened, rain began to fall. Heavy and relentless, it reduced visibility to almost zero. Walter, accustomed to rough conditions on Colorado roads, kept his speed low. We'll need to stop for the night, he announced, when the dashboard clock read 11 p.m. There's a roadside motel a few miles ahead. We can leave at dawn. We don't have time, Walter, Dorothy protested, urgency in her voice. We need to get there as soon as possible. Driving in this rain at night is asking for trouble. There's no point rushing if we don't make it at all. Dorothy didn't argue further, but Walter could feel her growing anxiety. At the small roadside motel, Walter paid for 2 rooms. The sleepy clerk handed over the keys without questions, used to late-night travelers. Meet at 5 in the morning, Walter said, stopping outside Dorothy's door. Get some rest. You don't look so good yourself. Dorothy nodded, clutching the key with trembling fingers. Thank you for everything you're doing, Walter. I know it's not easy. I should be thanking you for finding me, though I still don't understand how. Alone in his simple room, Walter couldn't sleep. He stared at the peeling ceiling, thinking of Tyler's letter, the mention of kidney disease. He remembered his own father, dead at 45 from kidney problems, a condition doctors said was hereditary. Had Tyler inherited that fate through his blood? Guilt gnawed at him like rust on metal. It wasn't enough that he'd abandoned his son, he'd left a genetic time bomb in his DNA. It was past midnight when he heard a soft knock at his door. He opened it to find Dorothy, still dressed, her hands gripping her canvas bag. "I can't sleep," she said simply. Walter stepped aside to let her in. They sat, he on the edge of the bed, she in the room's only chair. "You haven't told me everything, have you?" he asked. Dorothy sighed deeply. "There's more you need to know before we get there." She paused, as if choosing her words carefully. "Tyler's been married for 3 years. He has a son, your grandson Ethan. He's 2 years old." A grandson, the word crashed over Walter like an avalanche. A grandson he hadn't even known existed. "And the mother?" he asked hoarsely. "Samantha, a teacher, like Laura." Walter smiled sadly. At least he didn't take after his father in that. Always choosing well. "They're scared, Walter. The whole family. Tyler's too young to be facing this." "And Laura, does she know I'm coming back?" Dorothy looked away. "No, no one knows. It was my decision alone." That explained a lot. None of them were expecting him. What if I'm not welcome?" The question that had been tormenting him finally escaped his lips. Dorothy stared at him with an intensity that seemed to light up the dark room. "You're his father, Walter, and you might be his only chance." Walter didn't respond, feeling the weight of that responsibility pressing on his chest. "You said you have a kidney condition, didn't you?" he asked after a long silence. A faint smile appeared on Dorothy's lips. "You noticed, didn't you?" "Yes, I was hospitalized for a long time, but that doesn't matter now." "It does matter. You can barely stand. You should be resting, not crossing the country looking for a stranger." "You're not a stranger, Walter. And some things are more important than rest." Dorothy struggled to her feet. "Now I'll try to get some sleep. Tomorrow will be a long day." At the door, she turned one last time. "Walter, no matter what reception you get tomorrow, remember, you're doing the right thing, maybe for the first time in 15 years. When the door closed, Walter sat back down on the bed, holding his head in his hands. The life he had built, or rather the absence of life he had accepted, was about to crumble. And strangely, he didn't mind. He grabbed his phone and dialed Frank's number. On the voicemail, he left a message. "Frank, it's me. I won't be able to deliver the load tomorrow. You can fire me if you want. There are more important things I need to take care of." After hanging up, he felt a weight lift from his shoulders. For so many years he had lived for that job, for the road, for the voluntary solitude. Now none of it seemed to matter. He opened Tyler's letter again, rereading every word. There was no anger there, just the quiet acceptance of someone facing his own mortality far too soon. Walter picked up the photograph that had come with the letter, him and Tyler years ago when they were still a family. He turned it over and noticed an inscription on the back, in Laura's handwriting. "Tyler and his father Walter, Hot Springs, January 2000. January 2000, just a few months before he left." On that trip, Walter already knew he was going to leave. He had already planned his escape to the road. He couldn't bear to look at the smiling face of that younger father, pretending for the camera a happiness he didn't feel. He put the photo away and tried to sleep. But sleep wouldn't come. At 4 in the morning, he gave up and took a cold shower. When he stepped out of the bathroom, he found a note slipped under the door. In Dorothy's elegant handwriting, it read, "I had to leave early. Meet me at the hospital, room 304. Fate sometimes offers second chances, Walter. It's up to us to take them." Confused and worried, Walter finished dressing in a hurry and went to Dorothy's room. He knocked several times, but there was no answer. The front desk was empty at that hour, so he simply left the keys on the counter and walked out. The rain had eased to a light drizzle. The sky was beginning to brighten timidly on the horizon as Walter started the truck's engine. Fort Collins was less than 3 hours away. Soon he would face his past. The sun had fully risen by the time Walter spotted the first buildings of Fort Collins. The city had grown a lot since the last time he'd passed through, delivering loads to the local sugar mills. His GPS directed him to Memorial General Hospital, but Walter felt disoriented on the now wider, busier streets. He got lost twice before finally spotting the large white building with the hospital's name in blue letters. He struggled to park. The truck on a side street earning irritated looks from drivers who had to swerve around the massive vehicle. At that moment, Walter wished he had something better to wear than the faded blue shirt and worn-out jeans he wore on the road. At the reception desk, a clerk eyed him suspiciously. "Good morning, I'm looking for Tyler Thompson, room 304. "Are you a relative?" she asked, typing on the computer. Walter hesitated. I'm his father." The clerk looked up, studying him curiously. "One moment." She picked up the phone and dialed an extension. "Mrs. Laura? There's a man here at reception who says he's Tyler's father." A pause. "Yes, Mr. Walter Thompson." Walter felt his heart race. Laura was here, and now she knew he had come. The clerk hung up. "She's coming down to meet you," she said, pointing to a waiting area. "You can wait over there." The next 5 minutes were the longest of Walter's life. Sitting on the edge of an uncomfortable chair, he rehearsed in his mind what he would say to Laura after 15 years. No words seemed right. Then she appeared, stepping out of the elevator. Walter barely recognized her. Her once brown hair was now short and streaked with grey. Wrinkles framed her eyes and mouth, but it was still Laura with the same upright posture and direct gaze she'd always had. She stopped a few steps away, staring at him as if he were a ghost. "Walter," she finally said, her voice deeper than he remembered. "Laura," he replied, standing up, unsure whether to reach out or keep his distance. He chose the latter. How is he?" "Not well," she answered bluntly. "How did you find out? Who told you?" Walter frowned. "Mrs. Dorothy. She found me on the road yesterday, showed me Tyler's letter." Laura looked confused. "Mrs. Dorothy? What Mrs. Dorothy?" "The lady on the same floor as Tyler at the hospital. She said you two met here." Laura shook her head slowly. "Walter, there's no Mrs. Dorothy on Tyler's floor. I know every patient there." "And what letter?" A chill ran down Walter's spine. He pulled the envelope from his pocket and handed it to Laura, who examined it with a stunned expression. "This is Tyler's handwriting, yes, but—" She looked at Walter. "He wrote several of these letters over the years, never knew where to send them. She said she was a patient here, shared the floor with Tyler, was settling unfinished business." Laura handed the letter back to Walter, her expression now worried. "I don't know who this woman is, but no one by that name was in the nephrology wing. I'm certain of it." Walter felt the world spin around him. Who was Dorothy then? How did she know so much about him and Tyler? She knew details. "Laura, things no one else could know. How did you find me?" The voice came from behind Walter. Turning, he saw a young man in a wheelchair pushed by a nurse. He was thin with deep circles under his eyes, but those eyes, they were the same ones Walter saw every morning in the mirror. "Tyler," he murmured, unable to say more. The young man stared at him with a mix of shock and uncertainty. 15 years had turned the child Walter abandoned into a grown man, yet still recognizable. "How did you know I was here?" Tyler repeated, his voice weak but firm. Walter opened his mouth to explain, but no sound came out. How could he explain something he didn't understand himself? "A woman found me on the road yesterday," he managed, finally. "Said she knew you from the hospital, that you were sick, and—" He stopped, searching for the right words. "That I needed to come." Tyler and Laura exchanged puzzled glances. "What woman?" Tyler asked. "No one knew where you were. I looked for years." Walter's legs weakened, and he leaned against the wall for support. "She said her name was Dorothy Williams, a grey-haired woman in a floral dress, carried a brown canvas bag." He described Dorothy's appearance in detail, hoping something would make sense to them. Tyler shook his head, but Laura paled. "The patient in room 310, she murmured, bringing her hand to her mouth. "But she passed 3 days ago." "What do you mean, passed?" asked Walter, though he already knew the answer. Laura stared at him, her eyes brimming with tears. "She died, Walter. Mrs. Dorothy passed away on Tuesday. I was at the funeral." Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now continuing. The silence that followed was broken only by the distant sound of an ambulance siren. Walter felt the world spinning around him, Laura's words echoing in his mind like a funeral bell. This can't be, he stammered, his face pale. I spent the whole day with her yesterday. We slept at the same hotel. Tyler looked at his mother, then at Walter, suspicion clear in his tired eyes. Dad, he said, the word sounding strange, on his lips after so many years. Whatever happened, we can talk about it later. I'm not in any condition to... He didn't finish the sentence. A nurse hurried over, summoned by Laura's gesture. He's turning pale again, Laura said, her voice tense. We need to take him back. Can I see him later? Walter asked, taking a hesitant step toward his son. Tyler and Laura exchanged glances, a silent communication that left Walter completely excluded. Come by at 2 in the afternoon, Laura finally replied. I'll be in the room with him. As they walked toward the elevator, Walter stood frozen, in the middle of the lobby, feeling more lost than ever. The pieces didn't fit. How could he have spent an entire day with a woman who, according to Laura, had already passed away? Walter left the hospital in shock, wandering aimlessly through the nearby streets. He found a small diner and sat at a corner table, ordering only a black coffee. While he waited, he pulled out his phone. There were 7 missed calls from Frank, and 1 message. You're fired. Leave the truck at the Fort Collins depot and mail the keys via FedEx. 15 years of service thrown in the trash. Walter set the phone down on the table, feeling nothing. The job that had been his only anchor for over a decade now seemed insignificant compared to what he was going through. The coffee arrived, steaming and bitter, just how he liked it. As he stirred the dark liquid, his mind raced, trying to find a logical explanation for everything. Maybe the Dorothy he'd met wasn't the same one from the hospital. Maybe Laura had confused the people. Or maybe... Walter pushed away the irrational thought trying to form. He didn't believe in ghosts or supernatural interventions. There was a rational explanation for all this. He just had to find it. He decided to return to the hotel where they'd stayed the night before. Maybe there he could find some clue, some confirmation that Dorothy was real. But first, there was something more urgent to do. He picked up his phone again and, after a few minutes of searching online, found what he was looking for. The address of a medical lab near the hospital. I need a kidney compatibility test, Walter told the receptionist at the lab an hour later. It's urgent. The woman explained the procedure and costs. Walter signed the papers and paid up front, using most of the cash in his pocket. When the nurse called his name for the blood draw, he felt a strange sense of purpose, something he hadn't experienced in years. Results will be ready in 24 hours, the nurse informed him after collecting the samples. Did you leave a contact number? Walter nodded, though he knew he'd soon need a new SIM card. Frank would likely cut off his current one any minute. Back on the street, Walter checked his watch. There were still 3 hours left before the scheduled time with Laura and Tyler. He decided to go to the bus station and buy a ticket to Chicago for the next day. He didn't know how long he'd stay in Fort Collins, but he needed to think about what came after. At the bus station, while waiting in line, he noticed a small bookstore. In the window, one book caught his eye. Angels Among Us, Stories of Vi. Unexplained Interventions. Walter shook his head, annoyed with himself for even considering supernatural explanations. After buying the ticket, there was still time to spare. Walter decided to return to the hospital, this time to investigate more about the mysterious Mrs. Dorothy. At the reception, he spoke with a different clerk than the one from that morning, inventing a story about being a distant relative of Dorothy, Williams, who had recently passed away. I'd just like to know the cause. I couldn't make it to the funeral, he explained, trying to sound genuinely sad. The clerk, after some hesitation, typed the name into the system. Hear it. Is Dorothy Mae Williams, passed away on Tuesday due to kidney complications. She looked at Walter. Are you a relative? Distant cousin, Walter lied. We could have been closer. The clerk nodded sympathetically. She was a lovely woman, always kind to everyone. Was she hospitalized long? Almost. 3 months. She refused dialysis in the last few weeks. Walter frowned. Refused treatment? Why? The clerk shrugged. I couldn't say, sir. Maybe she was tired of fighting. It happens with older patients sometimes. Walter thanked her and walked away, more confused than before. It was confirmed. There really had been a Dorothy Williams, hospitalized there with kidney problems, who had died 3 days ago. The same Dorothy who had supposedly traveled with him from Colorado all the way here. In the lobby, Walter sat on a bench, trying to gather his thoughts. That's when he noticed on the bulletin board a small poster with a photo of an elderly woman smiling. Below the photo it read, "In memory of Dorothy May Williams, 1945-2025, retired teacher, volunteer and friend to all at Memorial General Hospital, her kindness and wisdom will remain forever in our hearts." Walter stood and approached the poster, his heart racing. It was her. The same woman he'd met on the road, who had shown him Tyler's letter and guided him here. The same gentle eyes, the same serene smile. But how? How could he have spent an entire day with someone who had already passed? Dorothy's words echoed in his mind, clear as if she were standing beside him. I was hospitalized for a long time. Now I'm just tying up loose ends. Loose ends. Like reuniting a father and son before it was too late. A chill ran down Walter's spine. He didn't believe in these things, he never had. But how could he explain the unexplainable? The time to meet Laura was approaching. Walter bought a small bouquet of flowers from the hospital gift shop and went up to the 3rd floor looking for room 304. He found Laura sitting in a chair beside the bed where Tyler rested. The young man seemed to have fallen asleep, his face even paler under the fluorescent light. Laura stood when Walter entered, gesturing for them to speak outside. "He had an episode this morning," she explained, her voice low and tired. "The doctor just left. Let's let him rest a bit." In the hallway, Walter handed the flowers to Laura, unsure of what to say. "These are for you," he murmured awkwardly. I'm sorry for everything, Laura." She accepted the bouquet with a nod, but her eyes remained cold. 15 years, Walter. 15 years without a word, without a call, without a single penny in child support. And now you show up out of nowhere. "I know I have no excuses," he said quietly. "But I'm here now. I want to help." "Help how? What do you think you can do after all this time?" Walter took a deep breath. "I took a compatibility test today for the donation." Laura seemed momentarily surprised, but quickly returned to her skeptical expression. "You don't even know if you're a match." "If I am, I'm willing. He's my son, Laura." "Now he's your son." The bitterness in her voice was palpable. "Where were you when he needed a father at his high school graduation, when he broke his arm at 16, when he started college?" The words hit Walter like arrows, each one finding its mark in his heart. He had no answers, no excuses. "I'm not asking for forgiveness," he finally said. "I don't expect you or him to take me back. I just want to do the right thing for once." Laura studied him for a long moment, as if trying to gauge his sincerity. "Are you going to disappear again afterward? If you're a match, will you donate the kidney and vanish for another 15 years? "No," Walter replied, holding her gaze. "I won't disappear, but I won't force myself on him either. It depends on what Tyler wants." Laura let out a tired sigh. "Have you even met the grandson you have?" "No, Dorothy." He hesitated, still uncomfortable mentioning that name. "I heard he's 2 years old." "Ethan," Laura said, a faint smile appearing for the first time. "He's with Samantha, Tyler's wife, at her mother's house. We don't want him seeing his father like this." Walter nodded, understanding the instinctive protectiveness. "Laura, I need to ask you something. About Mrs. Dorothy." Laura's expression turned serious again. "What do you want to know? What was she like? I mean, as a person?" Laura thought for a moment. "Kind. Extremely kind. She helped everyone on the floor, even when she was sick. Always had a comforting word, a story to tell." She paused. "She took a special interest in Tyler, spent hours talking with him." "Did she know about me?" "Yes," Laura replied, frowning slightly. "Tyler told her about you, about how he tried to find you for years." Walter swallowed hard. "And where did she live? Did she have family?" She lived in a small town near Manitou Springs, if I remember right. She was a widow, no children. Why so many questions about her? Walter hesitated. How could he explain something he didn't even understand himself? I'm just trying to figure out how she found me. It's confusing. At that moment, the door to the room opened and Tyler appeared, leaning on a cane. He seemed to have overheard the conversation. She was in the parking lot corridors, he said, his voice weak but firm. She'd spent hours looking out the window at the trucks passing by. Said she was waiting for someone. Walter and Laura turned to him, surprised. Tyler, you should be resting, Laura scolded, moving toward him. Tyler shook his head, his eyes fixed on Walter. I want to talk to him, alone. Laura hesitated, looking between them. Are you sure? I am, Tyler replied firmly. I've waited too long for this. Reluctantly, Laura nodded. I'll be in the cafeteria. Call me if you need anything. As she walked away, Tyler gestured toward the room. Can we talk in there? I shouldn't stand too long. Inside the room, Tyler sat in the armchair by the bed, while Walter remained standing, uneasy. You can sit, Tyler said, pointing to the edge of the bed. Walter obeyed, unsure how to begin. I thought about what I'd say when I finally found you, Tyler started, breaking the silence. I rehearsed whole speeches. Sometimes they were full of anger, other times questions. But now that you're here, I don't quite know what to say. I deserve that, Walter replied, his voice hoarse. I deserve your anger, your contempt, whatever you want to give me. Tyler studied his father for a long moment. The funny thing is, I don't feel angry. Not anymore. I did for a long time, but now... He shrugged. I guess when you face the possibility of leaving, some things lose their importance. The son's maturity impressed Walter. At 25, Tyler seemed to possess a wisdom that Walter himself, at 52, still lacked. Why did you come to me? Walter asked. After everything I did, or rather, didn't do. Tyler looked down at his hands, pale and marked with needle tracks on, his veins. At first it was anger. I wanted to find you to ask why, then as I grew older it was curiosity. And now... He hesitated. Now I think it's because I wanted my son to meet his grandfather, even if just briefly. The mention of his grandson made Walter swallow hard. I'd really like to meet him. You can, if you stay, Tyler said, watching his father carefully. Will you stay this time? The simple question carried the weight of 15 years of absence. I will, Walter answered, surprising himself with his own certainty. If you'll let me, I'll stay. Tyler nodded slowly. Mom told me you got tested for the donation. I did. If I'm not a match, we'll find another way, but if I am... You don't have to do this to make up for lost time, Tyler interrupted. This isn't a trade. I know. I'm not offering out of guilt, but because it's the right thing to do, because you're my son and because I want you to see your own son grow up. Tyler's eyes glistened slightly. You know, for years I imagined this conversation going very differently, with yelling, accusations. It still can if you'd prefer, Walter offered, half serious, half joking. Tyler gave a faint smile. Maybe another day when I have more energy to shout. There was a moment of comfortable silence between them, the first since their reunion. About Mrs. Dorothy, Tyler finally said. Mom told me what happened, or what you say happened. Walter tensed. I know it sounds crazy. I don't even believe in supernatural things myself, but I swear to you, Tyler, I spent the whole day with her yesterday, and the night at a roadside motel. I believe you. The answer surprised Walter. You do? Tyler reached for something on the nightstand, a small stack of papers. The last few weeks with her were strange. She said things that didn't make much sense at the time, about meeting someone on the road, about bringing together what was separated. He handed one of the papers to Walter. And there's this. I found it among her things that the nurse kept. It was meant for you. Walter took the paper, his hands trembling. It was a short note written in the same elegant handwriting as the message he'd received at the motel. Walter, if you're reading this, I found you, or perhaps you found me. It doesn't matter how, only that it happened. I've spent my life bringing together what was separated. Families, friends, loves. This was my purpose, and I believe it will also be my legacy. You and Tyler need each other more than you realize. There's time to mend what was broken, but not as much as you think. Thank you for stopping on the road for me. It was an act of kindness that revealed the man you truly are, not the one you pretended to be for so many years. With love, Dorothy. Walter read and reread the note, unable to find words. She wrote this before he began but couldn't finish. Yes, Tyler confirmed, 2 days before. She gave it to the nurse with instructions to keep it with her belongings, said the right person would know what to do with it. Walter carefully folded the paper and tucked it into his shirt pocket, close to his heart. I don't understand what happened, Tyler. I can't explain it. Some things don't need explaining, Dad. The word Dad made Walter's eyes burn. Sometimes they just happen. Tyler's phone rang. He answered quickly. Hi, honey. Yeah, I'm okay. He paused, glancing at Walter. Yes, he's here. No, everything's fine. Another pause. Yeah, I think that would be good. See you soon. He hung up, smiling faintly at his father. That was Samantha, my wife. She's coming with Ethan. I think it's time for you to meet your grandson. Walter felt a tightness in his chest, a mix of anxiety and happiness he hadn't experienced in decades. And is she okay with this? With me being here? Samantha has always supported me in searching for you. She's the one who insisted I keep trying, even when I was ready to give up. Tyler paused. You'll like her. And she'll definitely grill you about your intentions. Walter gave a hesitant smile. Fair enough. Tyler studied his father for a moment. What are you going to do now? I heard you tell Mom you lost your job. I did, Walter confirmed. But I don't mind. I'll find another job, something that lets me stay close, if you want me to. I do, Tyler replied simply. The bedroom door opened and Laura walked in with 2 cups of coffee. Brought these for you, she said, handing one to each. Samantha called. She's on her way with Ethan. She seemed more relaxed, as if something in the room's atmosphere had put her at ease. We were talking about plans, Tyler explained. Dad's gonna look for work around here. Laura raised her eyebrows when she heard Tyler use the word Dad. So naturally. I only have experience with trucks, Walter said, suddenly feeling inadequate. But I can learn other things. The important thing is staying close. Laura nodded, surprising him with her response. Richard, my husband, runs a small trucking company here in town. I can talk to him. Walter stared at her, stunned. You'd do that after everything? Not for you, she answered bluntly. For Tyler, and for Ethan. She paused. And maybe a little for Dorothy May, too. She seemed pretty determined to bring this family together, even after, well, you know. A shiver ran down Walter's spine. So you believe it, then? What happened? Laura shrugged. I don't know what I believe. I just know you're here, and that's what matters now. The conversation was interrupted by a knock at the door. When Laura opened it, a young woman with brown hair walked in, holding a little boy in her arms. The child had curious dark eyes and a smile Walter recognized immediately. It was the same smile Tyler had as a boy. Daddy! The boy exclaimed, reaching for Tyler, who hugged him tightly despite his weakness. Hey, champ, miss me? As they embraced, the young woman, Samantha, Walter assumed, watched him with a mix of curiosity and caution. You must be Walter, she said, extending her hand. I'm Samantha. Walter shook her hand, noticing the wedding band gleaming under the fluorescent light. Nice to meet you. Thank you for taking such good care of my son. Samantha smiled, though it didn't quite reach her eyes. Tyler's easy to love. The hard part was getting him to stop looking for you. There was a clear message beneath her words. Don't hurt my husband again. Ethan, Tyler called, adjusting the boy on his lap. There's someone I want you to meet. This is your Grandpa Walter. The boy studied Walter with curious eyes. None of the usual shyness kids have around strangers. Gumpa? He asked, testing the word. That's right, Tyler replied. He drives big trucks, you know? Ethan's eyes widened. Trucks? I like trucks. Walter took a hesitant step toward them, unsure how to act. You like trucks, huh? He asked, his voice thick. I've got one outside. Maybe one day, if your dad says it's okay, I can show you. Now, Ethan exclaimed with the impatience of a 2-year-old. The adults laughed, easing some of the tension in the room. Another day, sweetheart, Samantha said gently. Daddy needs to rest now, and Grandpa Walter isn't going anywhere, Tyler added, looking straight at his father. Right? Walter swallowed hard, feeling the weight of that promise. I'm not going anywhere, he confirmed, and for the first time in 15 years he felt he truly belonged somewhere. As the small family talked, Walter noticed movement in the hallway. For a moment, just a brief instant, he thought he saw a familiar figure, a grey-haired woman in a floral dress, smiling serenely before turning the corner. But when he blinked, no one was there. Only the empty hospital corridor, and the future awaiting him, a future he had almost lost to cowardice, but now had the chance to embrace thanks to a strange intervention he could never fully explain. In his shirt pocket, Dorothy's note seemed to pulse faintly like a second heart, a reminder that sometimes miracles happen not in grand, sweeping gestures, but in small acts of kindness, like stopping to help an apparently disoriented elderly woman by the side of a road. 3 days later, Walter's phone rang as he drank coffee in the small apartment he'd rented near the hospital. It was the lab. Mr. Thompson, we have the results of your compatibility test. You're a match for Tyler Thompson. Can you come to the hospital so we can discuss the next steps? When he hung up, Walter looked out the window at the blue sky of Fort Collins. Somehow he knew he'd be a match. It was part of Dorothy's plan, part of his second chance. On the bedside table, the photo she'd shown him now sat in a simple frame. Tyler in the hospital, smiling despite the pain. Beside it, a new photo. Ethan sitting in the truck cab with Walter beside him, both grinning at the camera. The journey would be long. There were wounds that would need time to heal, trust that would need to be rebuilt. But for the first time, in many years, Walter felt hope. And that in itself was a miracle. The months that followed were intense. The transplant surgery was scheduled and successfully performed, despite its complexity and risks. Walter spent weeks in the hospital, first for pre-op procedures, then for the surgery itself, and finally for recovery. Tyler, with a new kidney working perfectly, responded better than the doctors expected. Color returned to his face, and gradually, so did his energy. Samantha, who had initially kept a cautious distance from Walter, slowly lowered her guard as she saw her father-in-law's dedication. Laura, true to her word, spoke to Richard about a job at the trucking company. After some initial reluctance, Tyler's stepfather offered Walter a position as logistics coordinator, a desk job that drew on his knowledge of roads and routes, but let him stay in town. The relationship between Walter and Richard was polite but distant. There was an unspoken understanding between them. Richard had been there when Walter hadn't, and that created a quiet hierarchy both respected. 4 months after his arrival, Walter finally felt settled enough to visit the cemetery where Dorothy had been buried. It was a sunny day, the kind she seemed to love, judging by their time together on the road. In front of the simple headstone, Walter placed a small bouquet of daisies, the flowers he'd noticed on her floral dress. I still don't understand how or why, he said softly, but thank you. For everything. As he turned to leave, he noticed an elderly woman placing flowers on a nearby grave. She looked up, meeting his gaze. You must be Walter, she said, surprising him. Yes, he replied, puzzled. Do you know me? Dorothy talked about you often, the woman smiled. I was her colleague for 40 years, classroom partners, friends, for life. Walter felt his heart race. She was talking about me. But how could... Dorothy's friend smiled enigmatically. Dorothy had a special gift for finding lost people. Before she got sick, she ran a project that reunited separated families. She used investigative techniques, contacts, intuition. She paused. Tyler came to her a few months ago, desperate to find you. She promised to help, but fell ill before she could formally start the search. So how... That, the woman shrugged. I can't explain. In her last days, she seemed strangely at peace. She said she'd found a way to keep her promise, even if she wasn't here anymore. A shiver ran down Walter's spine. Even with a partial explanation, the mystery remained. Was she an extraordinary person? He asked, more as a question than a statement. Extraordinary doesn't begin to describe Dorothy, her friend smiled. Again. I'm glad it worked, whatever it was. Tyler deserved to know his father. As the woman walked away, Walter stood motionless for a few more minutes, staring at Dorothy's gravestone. Some things, as Tyler had said, might not need an explanation. When he returned home, and it was strange to have a place to call home, again, he found a message from Tyler on his phone inviting him to Sunday lunch. The whole family would be there, including Richard and Laura. Sitting in his small apartment, Walter opened a box he'd brought from his truck, the few personal belongings he'd gathered over 15 years on the road. Among them was a small journal where he'd jotted down sporadic thoughts, more like a record of existence than a confessional. On the last written page, dated the day before meeting Dorothy, it read, "Another day on the road. Same landscapes, same stops, same emptiness. Sometimes I wonder if there's any purpose to any of this, or if I'm just running until the end." Picking up a pen, Walter added a new entry. "I've learned it's never too late to come home even when you no longer know where home is. Sometimes you have to get completely lost to finally be found." On Sunday, Tyler and Samantha's house was filled with laughter and chatter. Ethan ran around the backyard, occasionally stopping to show Walter some toy or important discovery. Laura and Richard talked with Samantha in the kitchen, while Tyler, still recovering but noticeably stronger, prepped the grill. "Dad," he called, motioning for Walter to come closer, "can you give me a hand here?" The word Dad still sounded strange and wonderful to Walter's ears. "Of course," he answered, joining his son. As they adjusted the fire and prepped the high meat, Tyler said casually, "I was thinking, there's a house for rent down the street, small but comfortable. It'd be good for you and Ethan could walk over to visit." Walter looked at his son, surprised by the suggestion. "You think it's a good idea, me being so close?" Tyler smiled, a genuine, unreserved smile. "I think we've spent enough time apart, don't you?" Walter nodded, unable to speak past the lump in his throat. "Besides," Tyler added, turning his attention back to the grill, "I promised Ethan you'd teach him all about trucks. He's obsessed." "Just like his dad at that age," Laura chimed in, having approached unnoticed. She carried a bowl of salad. "Really?" Walter asked, looking from Laura to Tyler. "You don't remember?" Laura shook her head, half exasperated, half amused. "He had a collection of miniatures, slept with a little red truck every night." Tyler laughed, slightly embarrassed. "I still have that collection stored away, thought I'd give it to Ethan." "I could help add to it," Walter offered shyly. "If you don't mind." "That'd be perfect," Tyler replied. Laura watched the two of them for a moment, then said something Walter never expected to hear. "You know, Walter, despite everything, and it's good to have you back." Before he could respond, Ethan came running over, holding up a drawing. "Grandpa, I drew a truck." Walter bent down to his grandson's level, examining the colorful picture where a blue rectangle with circles presumably represented a truck. "It's the most beautiful one I've ever seen," he said sincerely. "It's yours." Ethan exclaimed, pointing to a stick figure next to the truck. "That's you." Walter looked at the drawing, then at his grandson, his son, and his ex-wife. A family that had been shattered was now somehow finding a new shape, different from the original, but still whole in its own way. "Thank you, Ethan," he said, carefully tucking the drawing into his shirt pocket, next to Dorothy's note that he always carried. "I'll keep it forever." That night, after everyone had left and Walter was heading back to his apartment, he stopped halfway, gazing up at the starry sky over Fort Collins. "Thank you, Mrs. Dorothy," he whispered to the stars. "Wherever you..." "Huh?" And for just a brief moment he caught the faint scent of lavender in the night air, as if someone had passed by, leaving behind a trail of perfume and purpose. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now, continuing. A year later, Walter's life had completely transformed. The rented House on the same street as Tyler was now filled with family photos, new and old, creating a timeline that told the story of lives separated and reunited. On Saturday mornings, Ethan would come over for breakfast with his grandfather. At 4 years old, the boy was full of questions, and Walter, to his own surprise, discovered a patience he never knew he had to answer them. "Grandpa, why is the sky blue?" Ethan would ask, nibbling on a piece of toast with jelly. "They say it's because sunlight scatters in the air," Walter replied, relying on simplified explanations from the children's books he'd started collecting. "And why did you drive a truck?" That question was harder. How could he explain to a child that he'd driven to escape? That the road had been his refuge, his excuse to avoid facing responsibilities. "Because I liked seeing new places," he answered, opting for a half-truth. "But then I realized the best place is near family." Ethan accepted these answers with the ease of innocence. To him, his grandfather had always existed. He'd just been away for a while. At Richard's company, Walter had become a valuable employee. His knowledge of the roads, the best routes, and the dangers of each trip saved time and money. Though they'd never truly be friends, he and Laura's current husband had developed a mutual respect that made family gatherings less awkward. Laura, for her part, had moved from reluctant acceptance to genuine appreciation for Walter's presence in her son and grandson's lives. The old wounds were still there, but they no longer bled at the slightest provocation. "You've changed," she remarked one afternoon as they waited for Tyler to finish a routine doctor's appointment. "More present." Walter understood what she meant. Even during their marriage before he left, he'd always been partly absent, his mind on the next trip, the next horizon. "I'm trying," he replied simply. Tyler had fully recovered. The new kidney worked perfectly, and the physical scars from the surgery were now just faint lines on his skin. The emotional scars, Walter knew, were more complicated, but they, too, seemed to be healing. "Sometimes I still have trouble believing you're really here," confessed Tyler during a card game on his porch after Ethan had gone to sleep. "I spent so much time searching, imagining this moment, that it feels unreal." Samantha, who was watching the game while flipping through a magazine, looked up. "Well, believe it, because it's happening," she said with a smile. "And you were right all along." Samantha's acceptance had been for Walter one of his greatest victories. At first protective and wary, she had tested him in subtle ways before finally making room for him in her life and her son's. On one particularly meaningful evening, she had entrusted Ethan to Walter's care, so she and Tyler could go out to dinner for the first time since the surgery. Those few hours alone with his grandson, despite his initial nervousness, had been a turning point. When they returned and found grandfather and grandson asleep on the couch, a storybook about trucks opened between them, something shifted in Samantha's gaze. "He'd be proud of you," she told Walter that night as Tyler carried their sleeping son to his room. "Who?" Walter asked, confused. "Your father." Samantha adjusted a cushion on the sofa. "Tyler told me you lost your father young, that he was a trucker too, that you followed in his footsteps." Walter blinked, surprised. He rarely spoke about his father, a quiet and distant man who had died when he was 17. He'd taken the same career path, more out of lack of options than conscious choice. "My father and I weren't close," he admitted. "Maybe that's why you didn't know how to be close to Tyler," Samantha finished. "Sometimes we repeat patterns without realizing it." The observation hit Walter with the force of a truth he'd never put into words. "Do you think I'm breaking the pattern now?" he asked, his voice more vulnerable than he intended. "I think you're making a new one," she replied. "And that's what matters." The conversation with Samantha stayed with Walter in the months that followed, making him reflect on his own father, on the silences and absences that had marked his childhood. He was beginning to understand not just why he had run away, but also what he had truly been searching for in the solitude of the open road. On the one-year anniversary of his arrival in Fort Collins, Walter woke before dawn, restless. He dressed and went for a walk, his feet carrying him almost automatically to the cemetery where Dorothy was buried. The place was empty at that hour, the headstones casting long shadows in the pale light of the rising sun. Standing before Dorothy's grave, Walter placed a small vase of fresh daisies. 1 year, he said, as if she could hear. 1 year since you found me on the road. Or since you made me find my way back. I'm not sure. The silence that followed was peaceful, almost comforting. I still don't fully understand what happened that day, he continued. Maybe I never will. But I wanted you to know. He paused, choosing his words. The life you helped save wasn't just Tyler's. As he turned to leave, Walter noticed a familiar figure walking toward him, Dorothy's friend whom he'd met there a year earlier. I thought I might find you here today, she said, smiling. Did you come to visit her too? I come every week. The woman gestured to a small bag she carried. I bring flowers and tell her the news as if she can hear me. And do you think she can? The question slipped out before Walter could stop it. I don't know, the elderly woman answered, honestly. But I like to think so, and either way it does me good. They walked together to the cemetery gate, talking about Dorothy, about the family reunification project she had coordinated, about the countless success stories in her record. You know, said her friend, pausing before they said goodbye, Dorothy used to say something I always found beautiful. There are no coincidences, only meetings that were meant to happen. Do you believe in that? In destiny? I believe in purpose, she replied, and hers was to connect people. At the corner, before they went their separate ways, the woman added, she would be happy to see how your meeting unfolded. That's what she valued most. Not just bringing people together, but seeing them rebuild what was broken. When Walter returned home, he found a message from Tyler on his phone. Special lunch at home today, 1 p.m. The whole family will be there. We have a surprise. The surprise, as Walter discovered a few hours later, was the announcement that Samantha was pregnant again. We're having another baby, Tyler announced, beaming, raising a glass of juice in a toast. Ethan will have a little brother or sister in 7 months. The table erupted in congratulations. Laura hugged her daughter-in-law with tears in her eyes. Richard vigorously shook his stepson's hand. Ethan bounced around without fully understanding the excitement, but caught up in the joy. Walter remained, seated, momentarily frozen by emotion. A year ago, he thought he would die alone on some distant highway, leaving no legacy or memory. Now he was about to see his family grow even larger. Dad? Tyler's voice brought him back to the present. Are you okay? Walter stood up, pulling his son into a tight hug. I'm better than I ever thought I'd be, he answered, his voice thick. Later, when the kids were playing in the backyard and the adults were chatting on the porch, Tyler approached his father with an envelope. I have something for you. Inside was a framed photograph. Tyler, Samantha, Ethan, and Walter, smiling during a picnic in the park a few months earlier. For your collection, Tyler explained. I noticed you've been putting together a photo while at home. Walter held the gift carefully, tracing the smiling faces with his fingertips. Thank you. It's perfect. You know, Dad, Tyler continued, sitting beside him, I forgot to tell you something important about Mrs. Dorothy. Walter looked up, suddenly alert. What? In her last weeks at the hospital, when she knew she didn't have much time left, she wrote letters, lots of them, to friends, former students, people she'd helped over the years. Tyler paused. In each letter, she asked a different favor. Visit someone, make a call, look up an address, small pieces of a puzzle. To find me, Walter concluded, understanding. Exactly, it was a collective effort, organized by her before, Several people reached out to me in the following months, bringing information, what company you worked for, which route you usually took. The revelation offered a partial explanation for the mystery, but still left unanswered questions. So how did she know so many details about me? Personal things like the scar on my head? Tyler shrugged. Maybe I told her. We talked a lot during the 3 months we shared at the hospital. Or maybe Laura mentioned it. Or some things. Just don't have an explanation, Walter finished, smiling slightly. Exactly. Tyler raised his glass. A toast, then. To Mrs. Dorothy, wherever she is. To Mrs. Dorothy, Walter repeated, clinking his glass against his son's. That night before bed, Walter added the new photograph to the wall in his living room. It was a visual timeline of rebuilding, healing, returning. Beside it, he placed Dorothy's small note, framed like his most treasured possession. You and Tyler need each other more than you realize. There's time to mend what was broken, but not as much as people think. The words seemed to echo in the silence of the house like a gentle reminder that time was precious and each day an opportunity not to be wasted. Lying in bed, Walter pondered the past year. The roads he had traveled during his 15 years of running now seemed like a necessary prelude to finding his true way back home, as if each mile had, paradoxically, brought him closer to where he should have been all along. Before falling asleep, Walter whispered a silent prayer, not to any particular god but to the universe, to fate, or perhaps just to Dorothy, the unlikely guardian angel who had rescued him from his self-imposed solitude. Thank you for the second chance. I promise not to waste it. And when sleep finally came, it was deep and peaceful, free from the endless road nightmares that had haunted him for so many years. 7 months later, Walter was in the hospital again. This time, though, it wasn't for medical checkups or painful procedures, but for a moment of pure joy. The birth of his granddaughter, Dorothy Thompson, named after the woman who, directly or indirectly, had brought the family back together. In the nursery, Walter watched the newborn through the glass, standing beside Ethan, who was on his tiptoes, fascinated by the tiny creature. "She's so little, Grandpa," the boy exclaimed, now almost 5 years old. "When can we play with her?" "Soon," Walter replied, smiling, "but first she needs to grow a little." Ethan frowned thoughtfully, in a way that reminded Walter of Tyler as a child. "How long does growing take?" "Much less time than you think," Walter answered, running his hand through his grandson's hair. "Believe me, time passes much faster than we'd like." Richard approached, carrying a pink balloon that read, "It's a girl." "For you, champ," he said, handing the balloon to Ethan. "Want to go see your grandma? She's in the cafeteria." As Ethan ran ahead, Walter and Richard lingered for a moment watching the baby. "She looks like Laura," Richard remarked. "Same eyes." "And Tyler's chin," Walter added. "Which was really my mother's chin." It was the first time they had spoken about blood ties, about the genetic thread connecting past generations to future ones. "Tyler is over the moon," Richard said, breaking the brief silence. "I've never seen him so happy." "He deserves it," Walter replied. "He's a better man than I ever was." Richard studied his wife's ex-husband, seeing him in a new light. "You know," he said after a pause, "for years I heard stories about you. From Laura, from Tyler, and I formed a picture, not a very flattering one." Walter nodded, offering no defense. "Understandable. But the man I've gotten to know this past year doesn't match that image." Richard extended his hand. "I'm glad Tyler has you back, and that Ethan and little Dorothy have 2 grandfathers." Walter shook the offered hand, strangely moved by the gesture. "Thank you. That means a lot." When they returned to the waiting room, they found the whole family gathered. Laura, Ethan, Samantha's parents, a few close friends, all waiting their turn to visit the new mother and baby during the hospital's visiting hours. Tyler stepped out of Samantha's room, his face glowing despite visible exhaustion. "She's doing great," he announced. "The doctors say they're both perfect." As the family took turns visiting the room, respecting the hospital's visitor limit, Walter stayed back, watching the scene with a quiet smile. Anyone looking at the group would never guess the past fractures, the 15-year separation, the resentments and hurts that had once been part of their family story. "Are you going in?" asked Tyler, approaching his father. "Not yet," replied Walter. "Let the others go first. I have time." Tyler nodded in understanding. "You know, I've been thinking about something Mrs. Dorothy told me once," he commented. "She said time is like a river. It always seems to move forward, but in reality it curves and sometimes flows back to places it's been before, just from a different perspective." "She was wise," Walter agreed. "I don't know if I met her by chance or by fate," suggested Tyler, smiling. "Maybe, or maybe she found me in some way we'll never fully understand." "By the way," said Tyler, placing a hand on his father's shoulder, "here we are. And that's what matters, isn't it? Walter nodded, unable to speak, as emotion tightened his throat. When he finally entered the room to see Samantha and the baby, Walter felt as if a circle were closing. 18 months ago, he had walked into that same hospital as a stranger, brought there by a mysterious intervention. Now he returned as an integral part of a family. Samantha smiled tiredly but radiantly as he timidly approached the bed. "Would you like to hold her?" she offered, surprising Walter. "I don't know if I remember how," he confessed. "It's like riding a bike," Samantha assured him. "You never really forget." With trembling hands, Walter took the tiny bundle. The baby was asleep, her skin pink and perfect, her tiny fingers curled into fists. "Hello, Dorothy," he whispered, feeling a wave of protectiveness and love he hadn't experienced since Tyler was a newborn. "Welcome to the family." As he held his granddaughter, Walter looked out the hospital room window at the blue sky of Fort Collins. For a moment, just a brief instant, he thought he saw a familiar figure passing by, a gray-haired woman in a floral dress, smiling serenely before disappearing around the corner. But perhaps it was just his imagination, or maybe it was something more. As Dorothy herself had written in her final note, "There's time to mend what's broken, but not as much as we think." Walter smiled at the little life in his arms, grateful for the time he still had, for the second chances not always offered, and for the strange intervention that had turned an impulsive roadside stop into a journey back home. Outside, in the hospital hallway, an elderly nurse organized files. Her name tag read, "May Williams, head nurse." She paused for a moment, looking at the closed door of the room where Walter held his granddaughter, and smiled in satisfaction. "Mission accomplished, sister," she murmured to herself before resuming her work, as unnoticed as the guardian angels who pass through our lives without us ever fully knowing. In the years that followed, Walter's life blossomed in ways he could never have imagined. Little Dorothy grew up healthy and lively, with the same determined gaze as her grandmother Laura and the insatiable curiosity of her older brother. Ethan, now 7, had developed a special bond with his grandfather, spending more and more time at Walter's house after school. On a particularly hot summer afternoon, as Walter helped his grandson with a truck model for the science fair, the boy asked an unexpected question. "Grandpa, why did you leave before when Dad was little?" Walter froze, the small piece he was holding dropping onto the table. He knew this moment would come eventually, but hadn't expected it so soon. Over the years, he had mentally rehearsed various answers, but none seemed adequate now. It was a mistake, Ethan," he finally replied, opting for simple honesty. "The biggest mistake of my life." Ethan seemed to ponder the answer with a seriousness beyond his years. "But why did you make that mistake?" Walter took a deep breath, looking into those innocent eyes that deserved more than half-truths. "Your grandfather was very afraid," he admitted, the words costing him more than he imagined. "Afraid of not being a good father, afraid of disappointing the people he loved. And sometimes when we're very afraid, we do things that hurt others and ourselves." Ethan nodded, absorbing the information. "Like when I'm scared of the dark and scream and then Mom gets mad." Walter smiled sadly. "Something like that, yes, only my fear was much bigger, and what I did hurt a lot more people." "But now you're not afraid anymore?" The question, so simple and direct, struck Walter like a revelation. Was he really no longer afraid, or had he just learned to face it? "I still am sometimes," he confessed, "but I've learned that staying with the people we love, even when we're afraid, is much more important than running away." Ethan smiled, seemingly satisfied with the answer. "I'm glad you didn't leave again. Daddy is too." That simple conversation stayed with Walter for days. There was something liberating about admitting his fears to his grandson, about naming the demons that had haunted him for so many years. The next evening, during the weekly dinner at Tyler and Samantha's house, Walter watched his family gathered around the table, Richard telling a funny story from his youth that made Laura roll her eyes with a resigned smile, Ethan trying to teach Dorothy how to pronounce truck, Tyler and Samantha exchanging knowing glances as they served dessert. It was a scene he never imagined being part of, a blended family with all its complexities and layers. It wasn't perfect, There were still moments of tension, painful memories that surfaced in casual remarks, silences heavy with the weight of the past. But it was real, alive, complete in its imperfection. "What are you thinking about, Dad?" asked Tyler, noticing his contemplative gaze. "About how lucky we are," Walter replied, surprising himself with the simplicity and truth of that statement. Later that night, while helping Tyler wash the dishes, Walter mentioned the conversation he'd had with Ethan. "He asked me why I left." Tyler stopped drying the plate in his hands, looking at his father. "And what did you say?" "The truth, that I was afraid." Tyler nodded slowly, absorbing the information. "You know," he said after a moment, "for years, I imagined every possible reason. I thought maybe you didn't love us enough, or that you had another family somewhere, or that you just couldn't stand the life you had with us anymore." "It was never about you," Walter hurried to clarify. "It was about my own demons." "What demons, Dad?" The question was direct, without accusation, just genuine curiosity. Walter leaned against the sink, his wet hands gripping the edge. It was time to share stories he'd never told. "My father, your grandfather, wasn't a kind man," he began, the words coming out with difficulty. "He wasn't violent, don't get me wrong. He was just absent, even when he was physically there." Tyler remained silent, giving his father space to continue. "He was a trucker too, spent weeks on the road, came back for a few days and left. Again, when he was home, it was like he was somewhere else. Never took me fishing, never went to a parent-teacher meeting, never—" Walter swallowed hard. "Never said he loved me." "You don't talk much about him," Tyler remarked, "because there's little to say. He passed when I was 17. Kidney problems, as you know, and I felt relief." The confession hurt even after all these years. What kind of son feels relief when he loses his father? "A son who was hurting," Tyler replied simply. "Maybe. But when you were born, when I held you for the first time, I felt a terror I'd never experienced before. What if I was like him? What if I carried that inability to connect, to love properly? And the more I tried to be different, the more I felt like him." Walter paused, wiping his hands on the dish towel. "So you ran from what you feared becoming," Tyler concluded. "And I ended up becoming exactly that," Walter agreed sadly. "An absent father. The cycle I feared most repeated." Tyler placed a hand on his father's shoulder. "But you broke the cycle in the end. You came back. You're here now." "Thanks. To Mrs. Dorothy," Walter murmured. "Without her, I'd still be running today." Tyler smiled. "It still amazes me how she found you, or how you found her, or whatever happened on that highway." "Some mysteries are better left unsolved," Walter replied. "Like a miracle," Tyler teased, knowing his father's reluctance to accept supernatural explanations. "Like an act of kindness," Walter corrected. "Perhaps the greatest I've ever received." The following week, Walter got an unexpected call at work. It was the principal of Ethan's school asking him to attend an urgent meeting. Apparently, the boy had been in a fight during recess. When he arrived at the school, he found Ethan sitting on a bench outside the principal's office, his face red from crying, a makeshift bandage on his elbow. "What happened, champ?" Walter asked, sitting beside his grandson. "Where's Dad?" Ethan asked, not looking at his grandfather. "At work, they couldn't reach him, so they called me." Ethan hung his head, ashamed. "He's going to be mad at me." "Why don't you tell me what happened first?" Walter suggested gently. "Then we'll figure out together how to tell your dad." Ethan sighed, his small shoulders slumping in defeat. "Jason said I was weird for having two different grandpas. Said you weren't my real grandpa because you weren't there when Dad was little." He lifted his tear-filled eyes. "So I punched him." Walter felt a tightness in his chest. The past still found ways to hurt, even through mean-spirited, childish remarks. "I understand why you were angry," Walter said carefully, "but hitting others never solves problems, it only creates new ones." "But he was lying," Ethan protested. "You are my real grandpa." The simple words touched Walter deeply. "I am," he confirmed, his voice thick. "But you know, Ethan, Jason wasn't entirely wrong. I wasn't there when your dad was little, and that's a fact. It's part of our family story." "But that doesn't make you less my grandpa," Ethan insisted, with the clear logic of a child. "No, it doesn't," Walter agreed. "And you know why? Because being a grandpa or a dad or family isn't just about being there from the start. It's about choosing to be here now every day, even when it's hard." Ethan seemed to ponder this. "Like how you chose to come back." "Exactly." After a talk with the principal and a supervised apology to Jason, Walter took Ethan for ice cream before returning to school. On the way, the boy asked another question that caught his grandfather off guard. "Grandpa, who was Mrs. Dorothy?" Walter nearly choked on his ice cream. "Who told you about her?" "I heard Dad and Mom talking once. Dad said without her, you'd never have come back." Walter considered how to explain that extraordinary story to a 7-year-old. "Mrs. Dorothy was a very special person," he began carefully. "She helped bring our family back together when we were apart." "Like a fairy godmother?" Ethan asked, eyes shining. Walter smiled. "Not exactly. She was a retired teacher, a very kind lady who met your father at the hospital and decided to help me find my way back to you all. And she found you on the road." "In a way, yes," replied Walter, avoiding the more inexplicable details of that encounter. "Is that why my sister is named after her?" "Yes, to honor the person who helped us become a family again." Ethan licked his ice cream thoughtfully. "I wish I could have met her." "I wish you could have met her too," Walter answered sincerely. "She would have loved you." When he told Tyler about the incident at school, Walter expected concern or disappointment. Instead, his son seemed thoughtful. "You know, Dad, this makes me think of something I never told you." "What?" "When I was about Ethan's age, I also got into a fight at school, for a similar reason." Walter looked at his son, surprised. "Why didn't I ever know about this?" "Because it was after you left," Tyler replied without accusation, simply stating a fact. "A boy said my father left because he didn't love me. I broke his nose." Walter felt his heart tighten. "I'm sorry you went through that. The funny thing is, later when I grew up, I realized that kid might have just repeated what he heard at home. Adults talk, kids listen." Tyler paused. "That's why I've always been honest with Ethan about our story. I didn't want him hearing twisted versions from strangers." "You're a much better father than I ever was," Walter said sincerely. "Maybe," Tyler agreed. "Or maybe I just learned from the mistakes that came before me. That's how we grow, isn't it? Each generation trying to do better than the last." His son's wisdom never failed to amaze Walter. Somehow, despite his absence, or perhaps because of it, Tyler had developed an understanding of life and human relationships beyond his years. "Do you think Ethan will be okay?" Walter asked, genuinely concerned for his grandson. "He will," Tyler assured him, smiling. "He has something I didn't, a present father and 2 grandfathers who love him. It makes all the difference." In the weeks that followed, Walter noticed a subtle shift in his relationship with Ethan. His grandson seemed more open, more curious about the family's past, asking questions he'd avoided before. It was as if the incident at school, rather than creating a rift, had actually opened space for a deeper connection between them. One Sunday afternoon during lunch at Richard and Laura's house, Walter sat on the porch with his former rival, now almost a friend, sharing a beer as they watched the kids play in the yard. "You know," Richard remarked after a comfortable silence, "for years I was the only grandfather they knew. I was afraid that when you came back, that I'd take your place," Walter finished, understanding. "Yeah, silly, isn't it? As if love were a limited resource, something that gets divided and diminished." Walter shook his head. "It's not silly. I'd feel the same in your shoes. But the amazing thing is that didn't happen," Richard continued. "Ethan has room for both of us. Different kinds of relationships, different kinds of love. You were a father to Tyler when I wasn't there," Walter said, voicing something he'd thought many times but never said aloud. "I'll always be grateful for that." Richard seemed momentarily uncomfortable with the direct thanks. "I did what any decent man would do. Tyler's a great kid. It was easy to love him." You were a better man than me, Walter insisted. You took on a responsibility that wasn't yours. Maybe, but you're here now, that's what matters to them. When they went back inside, Walter noticed Laura watching them from the kitchen window, a thoughtful look on her face. Later, as she helped him serve dessert, she remarked, "I never imagined seeing you two talking like old friends." "Neither did I," admitted Walter. "Life is full of surprises, isn't it?" Laura smiled, a smile that still held traces of the young woman he'd fallen in love with 3 decades earlier. "You know, Walter, it took me a long time to let go of the anger, years." "I know, and you had every right to. But now," she continued, "seeing you with our grandchildren, with Tyler, I'm glad you came back, for them." There was much left, unsaid in that statement, layers of unresolved feelings, of pain overcome, of hard-won acceptance. But there was also peace, the peace of someone who could finally look at the past without it hurting so much. "Thank you, Laura," Walter replied, simply, "for everything." On that year's Christmas Eve, the whole family gathered at Tyler and Samantha's house. Ethan and Dorothy ran excitedly around the tree, counting presents, while the adults chatted in the living room, the aroma of roasted turkey filling the air. When it was time to open gifts, Ethan handed Walter a clumsily wrapped package, clearly done by small hands. "I made this for you, Grandpa," he announced proudly. Inside was a handmade photo album, decorated with colorful drawings of trucks. On the cover, in big uneven letters, it read, "The story of my Grandpa Walter." As he flipped through the pages, Walter found photos he didn't even know existed. Him as a young man with Laura, holding newborn Tyler. A few rare childhood pictures Laura had kept, and then, jumping ahead 15 years, recent snapshots. Walter with Ethan at the park, holding Dorothy, standing in front of his truck, at Tyler's birthday party. The last page held just one photo. The whole family gathered at Dorothy's baptism. Below it, with some adult help, Ethan had written, "Family is who chooses to stay." Walter couldn't hold back his tears. It was not just a portrait of his life, but of the redemption journey he'd begun on that deserted highway when he stopped to help an apparently lost elderly woman. "Do you like it, Grandpa?" asked Ethan, concerned by his grandfather's emotional reaction. "It's the best gift I've ever received," Walter replied, hugging his grandson. Later, when the children had fallen asleep, exhausted by the day's excitement, and Laura and Richard had left, Walter remained on his son's porch, gazing at the starry sky. Tyler joined him, bringing 2 glasses of wine. "What are you thinking?" "About, Dad?" "How life takes unexpected turns," Walter answered. "How small decisions can change everything. Like stopping on the highway to help a lost lady," Tyler suggested with a half-smile. "Exactly." Walter paused, taking a sip of wine. "Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I hadn't stopped that day." "I think some people are placed in our path for a reason," Tyler mused, "and some choices are given as doors to second chances." "Do you really believe that?" Walter asked, curious. "I believe the universe sometimes conspires in our favor," Tyler replied. "Call it fate, God, coincidence. The name doesn't matter. What matters is that it happens." They fell silent for a moment, watching the moon emerge from behind the clouds. "You know what Ethan asked me today," Tyler finally said. "He wanted to know if Mrs. Dorothy was an angel." Walter chuckled softly. "And what did you say?" "I told him some angels wear invisible wings and show up when we need them most." Walter raised his glass. "To Mrs. Dorothy, then, wherever she may be." "To Mrs. Dorothy," Tyler echoed, clinking his glass against his father's. And for just a moment, a fleeting instant, Walter thought he caught the faint scent of lavender drifting across the porch, carried by the night breeze. A gentle reminder that some presences never truly leave us, and that love once given continues to live on in the lives it touches. The end of the story. Dear listener, if this heartfelt journey has touched your heart, please leave your like and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss our next stories of overcoming and life-changing encounters. What did you think of Walter's reunion with his son?